Were you aware that Daniel had already reached the age of 80 when he was cast into the lion's den? It's incredible to think that he endured 6 entire days in that den and emerged without a single injury. How was this even possible, and what events led to him facing such a dangerous situation? This video will guide you through the fascinating story of Daniel and the lion's den, unpacking all the profound lessons and spiritual truths it contains. Daniel's story unfolds during the 6th century BCE, a time marked by significant upheaval and political unrest in the ancient Near East. He was a young aristocrat from Judah, born into a distinguished and well-regarded Jewish family. Daniel's life underwent a significant and dramatic shift when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon laid siege to Jerusalem in 605 BCE, taking many of its residents, including Daniel, into exile. It is highly likely that Daniel was still in his teenage years when he was taken into exile in Babylon. Daniel was one of those taken captive and led away from his homeland. Even though he lived as a captive in a foreign land, there was an undeniable sense of uniqueness and distinction about him that set him apart from others around him. According to the Bible, King Nebuchadnezzar ordered Ashkenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. This detail reveals to us that Daniel was of royal lineage during his time in Judah. These young men, as described, were to be without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. Ashkenaz was tasked with educating them in the language, literature, and cultural traditions of the Babylonians, ensuring they became well-versed in their new environment. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from his table so that they would be well-fed. In contrast to the other captives, these young men were to undergo an intensive 3-year training period, after which they would serve in the king's court. Daniel was among the select few chosen for this honor. He was selected, along with other promising young men, because of his sharp intellect, remarkable wisdom, and distinguished noble heritage. This marked the beginning of Daniel's journey into serving within the administration of the Babylonian government. At this point in the story, it becomes necessary to revisit the book of Isaiah because this moment directly aligns with and fulfills one of the significant prophecies recorded by the prophet Isaiah, offering deeper insight into the events unfolding. Daniel was born during the reign of King Josiah, a period marked by a spiritual renewal throughout the nation of Judah. However, not long after the death of King Josiah, the nation began to fall into a state of rebellion and disobedience against God. The nation's actions made it certain that God's judgment and discipline could no longer be avoided. Over a century before these events unfolded, the prophet Isaiah had delivered a sobering and prophetic warning about what was to come. Isaiah foretold, saying, "Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and what your fathers have accumulated until this day shall be carried to Babylon." He added, "Nothing shall be left." The prophecy continued, "And they shall take away some of your sons who will descend from you, whom you will beget, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon brought Isaiah's prophecy to fulfillment when he captured and exiled Jerusalem's most talented and promising young individuals as slaves, with Daniel being among them. Scripture provides very little information about Daniel's family background or their role in his life. It remains uncertain whether Daniel's family was aware of Isaiah's prophecy or if they understood that its fulfillment was unfolding before their eyes. One can hardly fathom the overwhelming emotions that must have consumed his family as they watched him being taken away into captivity. How might you have felt in such a situation? Were you aware that by confiscating all the sacred items of worship, Nebuchadnezzar was intentionally sending a powerful and symbolic message? Through the act of seizing these sacred objects and depositing them in a Babylonian temple, Nebuchadnezzar was declaring a bold and provocative statement: "My God is better than your God." At this point, the God of Israel was faced with the task of proving his supremacy. Daniel, together with his 3 friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, later renamed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, endured an intense and demanding 3-year training program in Babylon. It would be reasonable to assume complete and unquestioning obedience from someone who had been taken captive and then selected to serve in the king's court. Daniel, however, stood apart from the rest. He made a deliberate and unwavering resolution that he would abstain from eating the food that was specifically assigned to those selected for the king's service, choosing instead to adhere to his convictions. As the Bible states, Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Imagine being King Nebuchadnezzar. How would you react to a captive who had the audacity to reject the generous provisions you had offered as an act of benevolence? The food that was offered was of unparalleled quality, not merely suitable for royalty, but actually part of the king's own luxurious meals and personally consumed by him. Refusing a direct command from the king could easily have resulted in their execution, as defying such authority was a grave offense. So why did Daniel choose to take such a bold stance? There are a number of potential reasons for his decision. To begin with, some of the food provided might have been forbidden by Jewish dietary laws. As outlined in Leviticus 11, the Jewish laws concerning food were quite specific. In Babylon, pigs and horses were commonly consumed, but both animals were considered unclean under Jewish dietary laws and strictly prohibited. In addition, Daniel declined to drink the king's wine. While wine is not explicitly labeled as unclean in the Jewish law, it is plausible that the wine in question had been offered to Babylonian gods, or that Daniel had made a Nazirite vow, which would have required him to abstain from wine. Another possible reason is that Jewish law explicitly prohibits the consumption of meat that has been sacrificed to idols or false gods. While this is particularly evident in later periods, it would still have applied in Daniel's time. For Jews living in the diaspora, eating meat sacrificed to idols has always posed a significant issue and even became a major point of contention in some of Apostle Paul's churches. However, there is little evidence to suggest that this was a widespread problem during Old Testament times. A third, more compelling explanation is that Daniel saw eating the king's food as a symbolic acceptance of the king's friendship and patronage. In that culture, sharing a meal signified a deep commitment to a relationship. By accepting the food provided by the king, King Jehoiakim symbolically expressed his allegiance and loyalty to Babylon. Interestingly, Daniel 11:26 includes a warning directed at all who partake in the luxurious and rich food of the king who is to come. Daniel does not refuse the training of the king or the use of a new name, but he draws the line at eating the king's food because it is a public declaration of dependency on the king. Daniel chose to depend solely on the Lord rather than relying on Nebuchadnezzar. For this reason, Daniel made a firm resolution not to consume the king's food. He literally sets his heart not to eat the food. Daniel fully comprehends the situation, determines in his heart what is right and wrong, and makes the conscious choice to do what is right. Once he made his decision, Daniel remained steadfast and unwavering. His determined course of action was to consume only vegetables and water, ensuring that he would not defile himself by eating the king's food. He was going to feed on herbs and food grown from seeds. Regardless of the specifics of the king's meal, Daniel and his friends firmly decided that they would not partake in it. The official overseeing the king's chosen young men considered this plan unwise, convinced that without the royal food, the four would appear weaker than the others, which could land him in serious trouble. He expressed his concern, saying, "I am afraid of my lord the king, who himself has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you." In response, Daniel spoke to the guard who had been appointed over them. He made a direct appeal, saying, "Please test us for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food and treat us in accordance with what you see." The official agreed to Daniel's request and put them to the test for a period of 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his friends looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the god took away their choice of food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these four young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel specifically could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them. He found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. It was evident that God had set apart Daniel and his companions for a special purpose. Over time, Daniel rose to serve under the reign of 4 distinct kings. After King Nebuchadnezzar's death, his son Belshazzar ascended to the throne. Following Belshazzar's reign came Kings Darius and Cyrus. Scripture informs us that Daniel continued to reside in Babylon until the first year of King Cyrus's reign. You might question why the king opted to select captives specifically to be trained and eventually integrated into his government. Why would he alter their names, assign them a different diet, and extend to them treatment befitting royalty? Wasn't there a risk that these captives might later betray him, undermining his authority and possibly overthrowing Babylon from within? The reasoning behind the food, the renaming, and the education was straightforward. This initiative represented a deliberate attempt at thorough indoctrination, designed to strip these young Jewish men of their devotion to the Hebrew God and to erode their cultural identity. The ultimate goal was to assimilate them entirely into Babylonian society, ensuring their loyalty to the empire rather than their heritage. Without a doubt, Nebuchadnezzar sought to convey a clear and deliberate message to these young men. Look to me for everything. Yet Daniel and his companions rejected this notion, steadfastly insisting that their trust and reliance would remain solely on God. The majority of the Jewish captives, including the prophet Ezekiel, were sent to refugee camps where they performed menial labor as slaves. Only a privileged handful were chosen to hold elite administrative roles within the royal palace. The qualities that drew King Nebuchadnezzar's attention to Daniel and his friends are that they were children of Israel, and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles. Young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick to understand who had the ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. This strategy was essentially an assault on the future of Israel. By indoctrinating its most capable youth, Babylon ensured that if the captives were ever released, these individuals would be too deeply aligned with Babylonian culture to lead a restoration of their homeland. However, Daniel did not succumb to this plan. He persisted in his efforts to determine the specific time that God had ordained for the ultimate vindication and restoration of Israel. Daniel was likely just a teenager at the time when Jerusalem was conquered by Babylon. However, he was endowed with sufficient God-given abilities, physical strength, intellectual brilliance, and social skills that enabled him to distinguish himself from others. Nebuchadnezzar gathered young men such as Daniel into his palace as a way to showcase his complete dominance over Judah, while also ensuring he had access to a wide range of capable and knowledgeable advisors to serve him. With this calculated move, he not only added symbolic trophies to his victories, but also gained new intellectual resources for his administration. Although Judah lay in ruins, God's plan for Daniel was far from complete. Because of his extraordinary talents and skills, Daniel rapidly gained a position of prominence and influence within the Babylonian court. Daniel's remarkable gift for interpreting dreams and visions became widely recognized, which further enhanced and cemented his growing reputation. The first time this happened was when King Nebuchadnezzar had a very disturbing dream, but woke up utterly unable to understand the dream or interpret it. The king summoned his council of magicians to assist him, but he wanted to ensure that they wouldn't deceive him or fabricate an interpretation. So he declared, "I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Tell me the dream and then interpret it for me." The king demanded that his diviners not only reveal the content of his dream, but also explain its meaning, a task that was utterly impossible for any human to accomplish. Enraged by their inability to fulfill his request, the king ordered the execution of all the wise men in Babylon, a decree that included Daniel. This situation marked Daniel's direct involvement in the matter. Daniel turned to God in prayer and became the only individual capable of both recounting the king's dream and providing its precise interpretation. This extraordinary event distinguished Daniel even further. The king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Everything appeared to be going smoothly for Daniel, but unforeseen challenges and trouble were waiting just around the corner. As Daniel climbed higher in authority and status, he inevitably drew the envy and resentment of others. These jealous individuals were the ones who orchestrated the plot to have Daniel thrown into the lion's den. It was during the reign of King Darius that Daniel faced his trial in the lion's den. Here's how the events unfolded. During his reign, King Darius established a governing structure by appointing 120 senators to oversee the administration of his vast kingdom. Babylon, being an enormous province, spanned an impressive 2,200 acres. It was the world's largest city at that time, and notably the first to surpass a population of 200,000 residents. The appointed senators were tasked with serving as governors, acting as the king's representatives to enforce and administer his authority throughout Babylon. He appointed 3 administrators to oversee these satraps or governors, and Daniel was chosen as one of them. The satraps were made accountable to them. Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Let's take a moment to uncover the deeper meaning behind this account. Let's consider the remarkable level of integrity demonstrated by Daniel. Today, we often see political candidates or nominees subjected to this level of intense scrutiny. Just picture scrutinizing a public servant who has held office for about 50 years, searching diligently for any wrongdoing, and finding absolutely nothing amiss. No fraudulent claims, no scandals involving interns, no shady business dealings, no inappropriate gifts from lobbyists, and no complaints from his staff. In short, there were no hidden scandals or misdeeds in Daniel's life. His adversaries thoroughly scrutinized his life in search of flaws to exploit. But when they found nothing to criticize, they resorted to fabricating accusations. The absence of any error or fault in Daniel did not suggest that he was completely without sin, but rather highlighted that he was a man of exceptional integrity and moral character. It could also be said that Daniel was remarkably blameless in how he carried out his professional responsibilities. And this account of Daniel's character is trustworthy because it comes from others, not from Daniel himself. In this narrative, Daniel is not the one proclaiming his own virtue. While the world might not fully grasp the intricacies of doctrine or the deep, personal nature of worship with God, they can easily recognize traits like a bad temper, selfishness, arrogance, or dishonesty when these behaviors are displayed. As McLaren once wisely stated, "The world is a very poor critic of my Christianity, but it is a very sufficient one of my conduct." The men who plotted against Daniel were well acquainted with his character. They understood that Daniel could not be ensnared by any form of wrongdoing, but they also knew he would remain unwavering in his faithfulness to God, no matter the situation. Every Christian ought to reflect on whether others could make a similar observation about their own character and conduct. Their jealousy kept intensifying, building up over time, and they were consumed by a single desire: to find a way to tear Daniel down and strip him of his esteemed position and influence. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." This demonstrates that Daniel was not hesitant to openly express his deep love for God and his unwavering devotion to serving and honoring him in every aspect of his life. The administrators and satraps conspired together and approached the king, proclaiming, "May King Darius live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing, so that it which cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Did you know that this was not the first instance of a Babylonian king declaring himself as a god and demanding worship from his subjects? King Nebuchadnezzar had previously enacted a similar decree. He made a gigantic self-portrait of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned all the provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. Then it was proclaimed, nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Daniel and his friends miraculously survived this fiery ordeal, which gave Daniel the courage and confidence to face what came next. During King Darius's reign, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. You might be curious about the specifics of Daniel's prayer habits. Daniel's prayer routine had 6 distinctive characteristics. First, he prayed in his upper room, a private setting where his prayers were offered without any intention of impressing others. Second, he prayed with his windows open facing Jerusalem, a gesture that honored the place of sacrifice, even though no sacrifices were being made at the time. Third, his prayers were rooted in Scripture, following Solomon's plea in 1 Kings 8, where Solomon asked God to give special attention to the prayers of his people offered toward Jerusalem and the temple. And may you hear the supplication of your servant and of your people Israel when they prayed toward this place. Fourth, he knelt down on his knees while praying, just as Jesus, Stephen, Peter, Paul, and Luke did. Fifth, he prayed 3 times each day, understanding that while a brief prayer has value, consistent and abundant prayer is far greater. It is also worth noting that Daniel, despite being one of 3 governors overseeing a vast empire, still prioritized and made time for prayer. Sixth, Daniel's prayers were full of thanksgiving, reflecting the belief that heartfelt prayer is always enriched by gratitude. Spurgeon once beautifully remarked, "Prayer and praise should always go up to heaven arm in arm, like twin angels walking up Jacob's ladder, or like kindred aspirations soaring up to the Most High." While Daniel's decision to continue praying was noble and honorable before God, it also meant he had inadvertently fallen into the trap carefully set by his enemies. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. "Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or a human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "The decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed." Then they said to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. It is important to note that Daniel did not let the decree influence his actions in any way. He neither increased nor decreased his time spent in prayer. Instead, he faithfully continued his regular and disciplined prayer life. Danger lurked regardless of which choice he made. To pray less would have been a compromise, and to pray more could have been an act of pride. This action was not the behavior of someone seeking martyrdom or inviting persecution. Rather, it was a steadfast continuation of the faithful ministry and consistent prayer life that had been a defining feature of his many years of devotion to God. They brought forth accusations against Daniel, claiming that he failed to show proper respect and loyalty to the king, thereby undermining the authority of the throne. This accusation, however, was entirely false. Daniel's actions were not meant to convey any disrespect toward the king. Rather, they reflected his unwavering commitment and supreme reverence for God, which he held above all earthly authorities. King Darius had many admirable qualities, one of which was his willingness to be displeased with himself when he realized his mistake. Rather than shifting blame onto others, he accepted full responsibility for the situation. While it is clear he was angry with Daniel's accusers, he understood that the ultimate responsibility rested with him. Just as Darius experienced, the consequences of our poor choices often linger, troubling our hearts and minds long after the decisions have been made. Many times, all we can do is turn to prayer, seeking God's mercy and miraculous intervention to redeem the consequences of our actions. The king worked tirelessly, striving with great effort until the sun set, in an attempt to find a way to correct the situation and make things right. This indicates that Darius exerted every effort he could within the time available to him. In line with ancient Eastern traditions, executions were typically performed on the same day the accusation was brought forward and deemed legitimate, often taking place in the evening. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve, continually rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. If King Darius had such affection for Daniel, why didn't he simply revoke the decree? Despite his high regard for Daniel and his desire to protect him, Darius felt bound by the law. In the Medo-Persian Empire, once a law was officially established, it was regarded as immutable, based on the strict principle of the law of the Medes and Persians, which dictated that no decree could ever be altered or revoked under any circumstances. The idea of laws being irrevocable was firmly embedded in the legal framework and political structures of that era, reflecting a deeply held belief in the permanence and authority of decrees once enacted. Although Darius held deep personal regard and affection for Daniel, he felt constrained by the law he had officially enacted and, with great reluctance, carried out the punishment as mandated by the decree. Nevertheless, Darius openly voiced his hope and faith that Daniel's God would intervene to protect him. In the end, this hope was realized as Daniel was miraculously delivered unharmed from the lions. By this time, Daniel was likely between 70 and 80 years old. This estimation can be made by examining the reigns of the Babylonian kings mentioned in the biblical narrative. Historical records indicate that King Nebuchadnezzar was present in Jerusalem during the years 604 to 605 BC, where he posed a significant threat to the Jewish population, compelling them to pay tribute as a sign of submission to his authority. Daniel was among those taken to Babylon as part of this tribute. It is understood that Daniel was younger than 20 years old at the time, as it was the established practice to select teenage boys specifically, so they could be thoroughly trained and indoctrinated in the customs and traditions of Babylonian culture. By identifying the specific year Daniel was brought to Babylon and estimating his age at that time, we can trace and calculate the timeline of significant events in his life by aligning them with the documented historical events of the era. For instance, according to the Bible, King Belshazzar was killed, and King Darius succeeded him. It was under the rule of King Darius that Daniel was elevated to the prominent role of chief among his advisors. Historical records place these events in 539 or 538 BC, which would make Daniel approximately 65 to 70 years old at that time, depending on his age during captivity. At the time he was first taken captive. This period also marks the time when Daniel was cast into the lion's den. It is believed that he survived for approximately 15 more years after this miraculous escape, suggesting that Daniel likely passed away at an age of about 80 to 85 years old. Have you noticed that King Darius himself sealed the lion's den? This act may have been intended to protect Daniel, ensuring no one could attempt a rescue, as much as it was to enforce the decree. Darius was well aware that Daniel had formidable adversaries who might take his life if the lions failed to do so. Without a doubt, Daniel likely slept far more peacefully in the lion's den than Darius did in his palace. We can confidently assume that Daniel prayed while in the lion's den because prayer was an integral and consistent part of his daily life. Daniel didn't have to begin praying during this crisis. His life was already deeply rooted in the discipline of regular prayer. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Since Darius had been unable to sleep, it was natural for him to rise very early that morning. We can picture him anxiously waiting for the very first light of dawn, eager to find out how Daniel had survived the ordeal. Upon hearing Daniel's voice, Darius immediately realized that he had made it safely through the night. The lions would not or could not touch this servant of God. While it is unclear whether Daniel actually saw the angel, he was certain that God had sent one to deliver him. Hebrews 1:14 says, "Angels are ministering spirits sent forth to minister for those who will inherit salvation." God had sent an angel to meet Daniel's needs in the lion's den. Daniel's deliverance was a direct result of his faith. While Daniel's cause was just and he was falsely accused, these factors alone did not guarantee his safety before facing the lions. What truly shielded Daniel was his unwavering, living faith in God, which remained steadfast even in the direst circumstances. Because of this faith, Daniel is recognized in Hebrews as one who by faith stopped the mouths of lions. King Darius was deeply displeased with those who had conspired against Daniel. It is likely that Darius would have punished Daniel's accusers, even if Daniel had not survived. But the lions overpowering them before they reached the floor of the den confirmed their guilt. This miraculous event proved that it was truly angelic intervention that saved Daniel. It also demonstrated that there was no natural explanation for why the lions refrained from harming Daniel. The men who falsely accused Daniel met the very fate they had intended for him. This event serves as an illustration of the work of the cross in reverse. Instead of the innocent being punished for the guilty, in this case, the guilty bore the punishment intended for the innocent. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and revere the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persians. Daniel's life serves as a powerful example of how to adapt to new and challenging environments, especially for those living in a diaspora. Daniel demonstrated principles of adaptation and resistance that are relevant for thriving in any cultural context. His example teaches us to work for the prosperity of the places we reside while steadfastly clinging to non-negotiable traditions of faith. This is perhaps one of the most significant lessons from Daniel's story for contemporary Christians. In today's world, most Christians live in societies that are not inherently Christian. In some places, Christians face legal restrictions and even danger for openly practicing their faith. We have just seen from this story that we can trust in God's faithfulness and stick to his ways no matter what. Daniel is often regarded as a foreshadowing of Christ, revealed in the Old Testament. As a righteous and godly figure, Daniel's life pointed toward the coming of the Messiah. Daniel was described as blameless, much like Jesus, particularly in the miracle of the lion's den. The trial of Daniel bears similarities to the trial of Jesus before Pontius Pilate. Similarly, Daniel's miraculous escape from certain death parallels Jesus' resurrection from death that seemed inevitable. This concludes the inspiring story of Daniel in the lion's den. Among the many lessons in this story, which one resonates most deeply with you? What aspects of this story do you find particularly striking or impactful? If this video brought you value, we encourage you to like it and share your thoughts in the comments section. More amazing content is on its way, so click subscribe to stay updated and not miss out. In the meantime, feel free to explore any of the videos on your screen to deepen your understanding of Scripture. Thank you for watching, and may the Lord bless you and guide your day.